Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Tony Hyman.
Hey, Tony. How you doing? Stay close. Stay close, Tony.
Oh, excuse me.
In this video, an ex-Christian actually challenges the Christian apologist on some things that he thinks are contradictory in the Bible. Super interesting. Stay to the end. I want to share with you some thoughts from my time as actually a skeptic.
Full disclosure, I'm an agnostic atheist.
And you have a great radio voice. I'm telling you
thank
that
you.
right now.
What an
You should be
ironic
doing
blessing.
podcasts, man.
I may. Who
Okay,
knows?
good.
I used to be, aspire to be an apologist like you, but unfortunately that backfired.
Why?
Well, you see, I read the Bible, and that's kind of why I want to talk
But
to
you
you
got the
about.
voice.
I know. This is evidence against your position. But I want to ask you a simple question. Do you believe in witchcraft?
Do I believe? What do you mean? Like, do I think it's a good thing?
Well, do you believe witches
Do I believe in a
exist?
demonic realm that can be accessed? Yes.
Well, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, do you believe in witchcraft?
Define what you mean by
A
witchcraft.
witch. Witches. Do you believe in witches? Like the Witch of Endor, for example?
Oh, well, in the biblical sense, yes, of course,
Right.
yeah.
And do you believe in giants?
I'm a New York Giant fan.
Right. Right.
And
But
our
I'd
next
appreciate-
quarterback may be your guy.
Right. This is very amusing, but
Okay,
I
all
want a
right.
serious answer.
What do you mean by giants?
Well, giants, like the Nephilim described in
Well,
Genesis.
yes, there's been some archaeological discoveries which suggest, yeah, there were 8-foot, 9-foot people, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I have not heard of any of that. And in fact, I've researched the matter, and I can tell you there is no archaeological
Well,
evidence for that.
let's say there isn't, because I don't have it on my, I usually have
right.
most of this stuff
I
here.
wouldn't expect you to
Okay,
just know that off the cuff.
yeah, let's say there isn't. Does that mean they didn't exist?
Well, that there's no evidence for them?
Yeah.
Well, there's no good reason to believe there are, but you do.
Well, they could exist. See, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Right, but if you don't have any evidence, you probably shouldn't believe it.
Unless Jesus believed it and Jesus rose from the dead, and I just have a personal policy. If somebody rises from the dead, I just believe whatever the guy says.
Does it logically follow that raising from the dead makes everything you say true?
If Jesus claimed to be God and proved to be God, and God is the standard of truth, yes, it does.
How does that prove being God?
How does it prove being God that
For
Jesus rose
for
from
example, if I stood here, claimed I was God, died tomorrow, and was risen 3 days later, does that make me God? Does that prove my claims?
the dead? Well, if you had predicted it long in advance, if you were sinless, if you did 35 other miracles over 3 years, and then you did that, yeah.
That's not proof, though. It does not logically follow that because I can
Well,
rise from the
the
dead.
question is, what do you mean by proof?
Well, it doesn't conclusively demonstrate that I am God.
Well, what would it demonstrate?
Well, it would demonstrate that I have supernatural abilities, just like the demons and angels described in the Bible.
Yeah, but you see, Jesus also claimed to be God. He claimed to be the great I am of Exodus 3:14. He claimed to be the Son of Man of Daniel 7. These are all divine figures.
I understand that's what he
Yeah.
claimed, but that's why we're all here, or at least why I'm here, is because I don't hold that to be true, and I don't think that any of the evidence you presented, or at least citing the supernatural, proves the claim that Jesus is the
Well,
Son
it
of
depends
God.
on what you mean by proof, right? Someone can prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, but that doesn't mean that anybody necessarily needs to accept it, right?
Well, that's right. You can choose whether or not you want to believe
That's right. That's all we're saying here. So, but I'm trying to figure out what your standard of proof is. What kind of proof would you need to think that Jesus was God?
Well, that's an interesting question because honestly, I don't know. I don't know how anyone could prove that they are omnipotent and all-knowing.
Well, you could predict the future.
Well, predicting the future, I mean, the weatherman more or less is able to do that, but not perfectly. No, the weatherman, hey, okay, the weatherman has he has a degree in meteorology.
Okay.
But none of the biblical prophecies, like for example, Jesus prophesied that the generation would pass away before they saw these wonders, where the moon would turn to blood and stars would fall out of the sky. That prophecy is demonstratively false.
All right, hold on, Tony. Don't get a little too strident here, because that's not demonstrably false, because what Jesus is quoting in Matthew chapter 24 is Isaiah chapter 13, when Babylon was overthrown back in about 511 or 516 BC. And this is apocalyptic language to talk about a terrible time. He doesn't literally mean that the sun is going to go black and the moon's going to turn to blood and the stars are going to fall from the sky. That's apocalyptic prophecy language to talk about it being a terrible time. And it was a terrible time in 70 AD. Jesus said that in 30 AD. It happened in 70 AD. That's a generation. That's when those things occurred.
Jesus described that as being the second coming, or the establishment of his kingdom on earth is when that happened.
Jesus said to Caiaphas, "You will see the Son of Man coming with power on the clouds." And what he meant was that the judgment on Israel was coming for them crucifying him. And that's what happened in 70 AD. He didn't mean the end of the world, although some Christians will say there's a dual prophecy there. There's always a short term, and then there's a long term. The short term was 70 AD. The long term is still yet to come. That's the way prophecy works in the Bible.
So whenever the prophecy doesn't come true, it's a metaphor, is how I understand this.
No, it did come true in 70 AD, but there's a further prophecy later. Same thing is true with Isaiah 7:14 with the virgin birth. There was a birth of Isaiah's son, and then there's a future birth coming down the road later. Then you go to Isaiah 9:6, it says, "The child will be born who will be called God." And then Isaiah 53 talks about the suffering servant is God. And after the suffering servant dies, he will see the light of life, a reference to the resurrection, which is then seen 700 years later.
Jesus, once again, we're in a vicious circle here. Jesus claimed that he satisfied that prophecy, but also you have the prophecy that I believe he would be a Nazarite or a Nazarene, but Nazareth and Nazarene I don't believe are the same thing. I forget which passage it is in Matthew, but I saw that the closest in my cross-reference, because I have
Matthew
a Bible.
chapter 2, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And it says that he was born, don't quote me, but as a Nazarene, as it was prophesied. But there is no prophecy
there's no
of
Old
that.
Testament prophecy. What he's doing is and I haven't studied that passage directly myself, but my co-author has, Dr. Norman Geisler, in his book, The Big Book of Bible Difficulties, he deals with that, so I'd have to go back and read what he says there. But I remember him saying something like what he's talking about there is he is pulling together a bunch of references in the Old Testament to say he will be a Nazarene.
Right. Well, I have to respect the time of the other
well, thank
people.
you, Tony.
So, thank you.
Tony, why are you not a Christian?
I'm not a Christian. Well, I was a Christian at one time, but I ceased to be a Christian after I began reading the Old Testament, and it occurred to me that, for example, the witch example, if somebody told me they saw a witch, I wouldn't believe it, but when I read it in the Bible, suddenly I was compelled to believe it. And
So if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Well, yes, of course I would.
Okay, so let's suppose that the Bible has errors in it, and the witch of Endor didn't happen, but Jesus rose from the dead. Would you be a Christian?
No, I wouldn't, because the only way I know about the resurrection of Jesus is through the Bible.
Well, no, not necessarily true. There wouldn't even be a New Testament if Jesus hadn't risen from the dead. And there wouldn't even be a church unless the resurrection occurred.
Did I misunderstand your question? Did you say if Jesus was not risen, but the Bible wasn't?
No. If Jesus had risen from the dead, but you can't bring yourself to believe everything in the Old Testament. You can be a Christian and think some things in the Old Testament didn't happen. You can still be a Christian and do that. I think when you're doing that, you're disagreeing with Jesus, which is never wise. But you can do that.
Yes.
So just leave that option open if you would.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
All right, man, I like Tony. I like him. He reminds me of myself, actually, when I was going through my skepticism and times of doubt as a Christian. And a lot of his questions he even brought up were very similar to the same things that I was struggling with. However, I think there's some distinct differences, and I think there's actually some insights to what's really going on with Tony underneath the surface, because like anything in anybody, there is what we are saying, the outward projection, and then there's stuff underneath the surface. So towards the end of their discussion, they kind of get into the random intricacies of like Bible prophecy, and this prophecy didn't come true, and this prophecy, blah, 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 blah. And I actually think those aren't as important as Tony was making them out to be. I think the real crux of his problem or his issue with Christianity really stems from about the first half of their discussion. This, of course, is when Tony's asking questions about the witches, about giants, and then even when they get into the idea of proof. One interesting thing about proof is for a person like Tony, and many people, I've seen this happen when Dr. Turk talks to them, the question inevitably comes to, well, okay, what is your standard of proof? And what would it take to prove to you. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard the response comes back as, well, I don't really even know. And I heard one person say, if you don't know, then how do you know that you actually haven't had good enough proof given to you? If you don't have a standard of proof, or you just are unwilling to be, you don't know what good evidence is, how do you know that you actually haven't had the right evidence presented to you? But really, it's not the evidence, it's a underlying assumption that I don't want it to be true. I'm resisting this. I think Tony's gonna have to wrestle with this. I think his conversation with Dr. Turk revealed that Tony is not so much wanting proof, but Tony is already starting with the assumption that it's probably impossible to prove God. And then the kind of conversation breaks down. And on the other hand, I think we have to understand that there's probably never going to be, until we die and see what's on the other side of eternity, the ability to 1000% prove God. I mean, even if God appeared in the sky, like over the creation, I'm sure there is someone who could come up with some reasoning of like why either that wasn't real, or maybe that's not the God, maybe there's many gods. I mean, the list goes on. And so there's never ever going to be enough proof to convince someone who doesn't want it to be true. The important thing I think that I'm pulling away from this video is actually connected to something we've been talking about a lot on this channel. We've talked about it recently. Is Tony actually, as a Christian, when he was a Christian, you heard it in his language, he started from a base of not believing in the supernatural. He was not believing in things that were above the natural world. He said, I didn't believe in witches and I don't believe in giants, and only when I read the Bible am I forced to now believe these things. This, of course, comes from pragmatism, or the thought that the materialistic world is all there is. And it comes from the French Enlightenment. We did a video recently of a Christian teaching and atheism being harmonized together, actually helping one another. I'll put it in here, one of the cards, and it's really interesting. And I would imagine Tony comes from one of these traditions that teaches this certain Christian teaching. And I say Christian teaching. And this teaching is that there is nothing really supernatural happening in the world today. And in reality, there's biblical teachings in some of these churches that, like, you know, Jesus healed people, and it's essentially maybe possible for miracles to happen. But by and large, when you come to Christ, your life is essentially the same as it was before Jesus, void of any supernatural impact, and it's just very normal. But now you pray to Jesus, and what we're seeing is many people from this tradition, whether they know it or not, they believe in an eternal spiritual God, but they actually don't believe spiritual things are possible. And so when they're met with reasoning, philosophy, and even their own Christian teaching conflicts with the Bible, they have a bypass. One of the things that's interesting is actually many atheists believe Jesus was a real person. I mean, the famous skeptic who was an ex-Christian, Bart Ehrman, says there is undisputed fact that Jesus was a real person, and he was actually really crucified under Pontius Pilate. He had disciples who believed he was crucified, the whole 9 yards. Undisputed fact, this historian. The problem with Bart and many atheists is actually they don't believe it's possible for someone to be raised from the dead. The issue, really, when it gets boiled down to it, is not, is it true or whatever. It is, I don't believe in miracles. Which is why, and I will say it until I'm blue in the face, we need a resurgence of, yes, apologists who go into campuses and argue philosophy, history, whatever. We also need signs and wonders. I think Tony would do good to see blinded eyes open. I think he would do good to have the internal thoughts of his mind spoken to him by a prophetic word or word of knowledge. These things are there to confront the skeptic, to confront the person who is on the fence, who is, I don't really know. When you come in contact with the eternal, all the questions kind of just start to vanish. Well, this is super interesting. We'll be coming out with some more content. Thank you guys so much for liking and subscribing. If you want to watch some more videos, they're right here. If you like this, like it, subscribe, share it around. Appreciate you guys. I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.
I hope you all enjoy the video. Make sure you subscribe, like and share. Please.